It began 15 days ago, on a Friday that felt no different from any other, until it wasn't. I was sprawled on our living room couch, bathed in the pale glow of my phone screen, scrolling through old photos of Brian and me. Happy photos, from a time when his smile reached his eyes and mine wasn't weighed down by doubt. But lately, those moments felt like relics of a life I could barely remember. Brian had changed. His once playful charm had grown dull, his energy depleted, his warmth replaced by a cold distance I couldn't understand. He was always tired, always busy, always somewhere else. Our Friday evenings used to be sacred. A bottle of wine, shared laughter, maybe even the kind of spontaneity that ended with us tangled in each other. Now he barely noticed me. When I'd suggest something, anything to bring us closer, he'd brush me off with promises of later, but later never came. And that night, as he emerged from our bedroom dressed sharp enough to turn heads, I felt something twist inside me. "Emergency meeting," he said, fiddling with his watch. "My boss called, needs me at the office. I shouldn't be too late." I forced a smile, nodding as though I believed him. "'Kay. Drive safe." His lips brushed my forehead, a fleeting mechanical gesture, and then he was gone. The silence in the house felt suffocating after the door clicked shut. I stared at the spot where he'd been standing, my wine untouched on the table. Something about his tone, his rushed movements, his avoidance of my gaze. It didn't add up. The thought struck me like a lightning bolt. Follow him. At first, I laughed at myself, shaking my head as though I could physically dismiss the idea. But the seed had been planted, and it grew faster than I could uproot it. My gut churned with unease, my thoughts spinning in loops of paranoia and suspicion. Before I knew it, I was grabbing my coat, keys jangling in my hand. The night air was crisp and biting as I slid into my car. I kept the headlights off, following his dark sedan at a careful distance. With every turn he took, my nerves frayed a little more. He wasn't heading toward his office. 15 minutes later, his car slowed, pulling into the driveway of a house I didn't recognize. It was large, well-kept, glowing with the warmth of amber light spilling from its windows. My pulse quickened as I parked a few houses down, far enough to stay unnoticed but close enough to see. I watched him step out of the car, his movements deliberate yet hesitant, like someone slipping into a secret. My breath caught as he approached the door and was greeted by a man in a tailored suit, whose smile radiated the kind of confidence that left no room for questions. Brian disappeared inside. I stayed frozen in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My gaze flickered to the windows of the house, where shadows danced against the curtains. There was a rhythm to it all. Soft music, the faint hum of conversation, and the occasional flicker of laughter carried by the wind. Didn't feel like a work meeting. For a long moment I sat there, the pit in my stomach growing heavier with each second. My heart pounded as I debated my next move. Should I go in, demand answers? Or should I wait, piece together the puzzle without revealing my hand? The shadows in the windows shifted again, more figures joining the dance. A woman in a fitted dress leaned close to a man, her hand brushing his shoulder in a gesture too intimate to be casual. My throat tightened, but I couldn't look away. And then I saw him, Brian, laughing, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months. Something was happening in that house, something I wasn't ready to face. Yet, I couldn't bring myself to leave. The seconds stretched into minutes, and still, I sat frozen in my car, staring at the house like it held all the answers to questions I wasn't sure I wanted to ask. My fingers hovered over my phone, tempted to call someone. Anyone, but what would I say? "Hi, I think my husband's cheating on me, but I'm too scared to find out for sure." Well, I wasn't ready to voice it, to turn my suspicions into something real. But I couldn't just sit there either. My curiosity, or maybe my fear, was an itch I couldn't ignore. I slipped out of the car, careful not to let the door slam. The street was quiet, save for the faint hum of music and the occasional burst of laughter coming from the house. My heart pounded in time with my footsteps as I crept closer, staying in the shadows of the trees that lined the sidewalk. From this angle I could see more clearly. The living room was alive with movement, people lounging on sleek furniture, their drinks catching the soft glow of the overhead lights. Women in elegant dresses leaned close to men whose smiles spoke of confidence and charm. The air seemed thick with something I couldn't name, a magnetism that made my skin tingle even from a distance. And there among them was Brian. He was sitting on one of the couches, his posture relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in ages. A woman sat beside him, her red dress hugging her like a second skin. She leaned in, whispering something into his ear, her fingers grazing his arm as she laughed. He laughed too, a low, easy sound that hit me like a punch to the chest. I stumbled back, my breath catching. The Brian I saw through that window wasn't the man who'd left our house earlier, hurried and distant. This Brian was alive, at ease, magnetic even. The realization hit me like ice water. This is where he's been going. I pressed myself against the side of the house, hidden by the shadows, trying to steady my breathing. My mind raced. This wasn't just a party. It was something else, something more intimate, more secret. And Brian, my Brian, was part of it. I peeked again, my curiosity overpowering my better judgment. More people had joined the room, their movements fluid and languid. Glasses clinked, conversations grew quieter, more intimate. The woman beside Brian placed a hand on his chest, her lips curving into a knowing smile. I clenched my fists, a hot flush rising in my cheeks. What was I supposed to do? March in there and demand answers? Or wait until he came home, feigning ignorance while the image of him and that woman burned itself into my mind? The latter felt unbearable, but the former terrified me. The front door opened suddenly, and I jumped, pressing myself flat against the wall. A couple emerged, laughing softly as they made their way to a sleek black car parked in the driveway. They didn't notice me, too wrapped up in each other to care about the shadows lurking nearby. The door remained slightly ajar, and I caught a glimpse of the hallway beyond it. A faint pulse of music drifted out, accompanied by the murmur of voices. My pulse quickened as a dangerous thought took hold. What if I just looked inside? I hesitated, the fear of being caught warring with the need to know. But before I could decide, a voice called out from inside. "Brian, you're up next." Froze. The voice was playful, teasing, and it was followed by a round of laughter. I peeked through the narrow gap in the door, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they'd hear it. Brian stood, straightening his shirt as he crossed the room. He was smiling, his eyes bright with something I couldn't quite place. Excitement. Anticipation. The laughter faded as he disappeared into another room, the door closing behind him. And just like that, the house felt different. The energy shifted, the light dimming as if the secrets inside were swallowing it whole. I stumbled back toward my car, my legs shaky, my head spinning. I didn't need to see any more to know that whatever was happening in that house, Brian was no stranger to it. And I was no longer a stranger to the truth. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. The warm glow of the house seemed to mock me, its shadows teasing at truths I wasn't sure I could bear to face. I replayed the moment Brian stepped into that room. His easy smile and confident stride like they belonged to someone else. That image clashed violently with the man I knew, the man who once made me pancakes on Sundays, who stayed up late watching silly movies just to make me laugh. What happened to us? The air in the car grew stifling, so I cracked the window, letting the cool breeze brush against my flushed skin. My pulse still thundered in my ears, the pieces of what I'd seen tumbling chaotically in my mind. Was this a one-time thing? Or had it been happening for months? Years? My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, pulling me out of my spiral. The screen lit up with a message from Brian. "Don't wait up. It's going to be a late night. Love you." My stomach turned. The audacity of it. His casual lie, sent with the same 3 words that once felt like a promise. I almost laughed at how absurd it was, but the sound caught in my throat, twisting into something closer to a sob. I couldn't go home. Not yet. The thought of sitting in our shared bed, pretending everything was fine, made my skin crawl. Instead, I drove aimlessly, the city's lights blurring into streaks of gold and white. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed distance. From him, from that house, from the suffocating weight of not knowing what came next. Eventually, I pulled into an all-night diner, its neon sign flickering in and out like it couldn't decide whether to stay on. The smell of coffee and frying bacon greeted me as I stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming faintly. Sliding into a booth by the window, I ordered a coffee I didn't want and stared out at the empty street. The longer I sat there, the more the pieces started to come together. Brian's late nights, his sudden disinterest, the way he guarded his phone like it held state secrets. It all made sense now. I thought back to the shadows in that house, the way people moved with an ease that spoke of familiarity, comfort. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment affair. This was a world Brian had been a part of while I was left in the dark. The waitress refilled my coffee, her kind smile feeling out of place against the storm inside me. "Rough night?" she asked, her tone light but sympathetic. I nodded, managing a weak smile. "You could say that." She didn't press, just left me with a warm hang in there before moving on. I stared into the dark liquid, my reflection distorted by ripples as I tapped the edge of the mug. I wasn't ready to confront Brian. Not yet. I needed more. More answers, more clarity, more proof. I didn't know how, but I had to figure out what that house was. Who were those people? And most importantly, what had Brian become in their company? By the time I got home, the sun was creeping over the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and lavender. The house was silent, and I found myself standing in the doorway, staring at the space we'd built together, the place that now felt like a stranger's home. The air was heavy with memories. Late-night conversations over cold pizza, laughter that echoed off these walls, and promises whispered in the dark. I used to feel safe here, grounded. But now, every shadow seemed to carry the weight of a secret. I tossed my keys onto the counter, the metallic clatter breaking the silence. I didn't know where Brian was, and for the first time I wasn't sure I wanted to know. But I couldn't leave it alone. Not yet. I sat at the kitchen table, my laptop glowing softly as I searched for answers. The address of that house stared back at me from my notes, taunting me like a puzzle I didn't know how to solve. A quick search revealed nothing unusual. It was owned by a man named Philip Novak, someone I didn't recognize. The next few hours blurred into a haze of clicking links, reading between the lines, and chasing breadcrumbs that led nowhere. My coffee went cold, my eyes burned, but I kept digging. And then I found it. A social media post, buried deep in the tags of a local event page. It was innocuous at first glance. A photo of a group of people laughing in a dimly lit room, their faces partially obscured by the glow of candles. But the caption caught my attention. "Another unforgettable night at Novak's. For those who know how to live." My pulse quickened as I scrolled through the comments, each one more cryptic than the last. "Best one yet. Can't wait for the next. Novak never disappoints. Such a freeing space. Where else can you find this kind of freedom?" It didn't take long to piece together what they meant. This wasn't just a house. It was a sanctuary for people looking to escape their lives, to shed their inhibitions. A swinger party, dressed up in secrecy and allure. And Brian had been there. I sat back in my chair, my mind spinning. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture they formed was one I wasn't ready to see. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a text from Brian. "Heading home soon. Hope you got some rest. Love you." The casual tone made my blood boil. How could he pretend everything was normal while living a double life? For the first time I felt the weight of what I had to do. I couldn't confront him without more. I needed to know exactly what was happening behind those doors, what kind of life he was leading when he wasn't with me. I made up my mind. I would go back to that house, not as an outsider, but as someone ready to step inside and see the truth for myself. The house loomed before me once more, its warm glow spilling onto the perfectly manicured lawn. But tonight, I wasn't here to linger in the shadows. Tonight I needed answers. I parked my car a little farther down the street, the cool night air prickling my skin as I approached. My heart raced as I climbed the steps to the door, every fiber of my being urging me to turn back, to run. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. The door was slightly ajar, just as it had been the last time. Music and laughter spilled into the quiet night, muffled but unmistakable. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The air was thick, heavy with perfume and the faint tang of wine. The living room was alive with people, their movements fluid, their laughter melodic. No one seemed to notice me at first, their attention absorbed by one another, by the heady rhythm of the room. And then I saw him. Brian was sitting on a low couch, a glass in hand, his head thrown back in laughter. Beside him, the same woman from before leaned in close, her hand resting lightly on his knee. They looked like they belonged together, like they were a pair carved out of the same world. Something inside me snapped. "Brian!" My voice rang out, sharp and cutting through the hum of the party. The room fell silent, heads turning toward me. Brian froze, his smile dropping as his eyes met mine. "Emily," he stammered, standing abruptly. I stepped forward, my hands trembling, my chest heaving with a mix of rage and heartbreak. "How long?" My voice cracked, the weight of the question threatening to crush me. "How long have you been coming here? How long have you been lying to me?" "Emily, don't!" I screamed, cutting him off. "Don't you dare try to explain this away." The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing tighter with every passing second. The faces around us blurred, their whispers and stares a cacophony in my ears. "This is what you've been doing?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "All those late nights, all those excuses, you've been here? With her? With all of them?" Brian stepped toward me, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Emily, it's not what you think. Not what I think." I laughed bitterly, tears streaming down my face. "You've been lying to me for months, making me feel like I was crazy for doubting you, for questioning you. And all this time you were—" I couldn't finish. My voice broke, the words choking me. Brian reached for me, but I stepped back, shaking my head. "Don't touch me," I spat, my voice venomous. "Emily, please," he pleaded, his tone desperate. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this." His words hit me like a slap. "You didn't mean for me to find out?" I repeated, my voice rising. "That's all you have to say?" I turned, my gaze sweeping the room, taking in the faces of the strangers who had shared in his betrayal. They looked away, their silence as damning as any confession. My chest heaved as I turned back to Brian, my voice breaking as I said the words I never thought I'd say. "I loved you. I trusted you. And this is how you repay me." "Emily, please. Let me explain," Brian begged, but I was already moving toward the door. I paused, turning back to him one last time. "You already explained everything the moment you walked into this house." With that, I shoved the door open and ran. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I ran to my car, tears blurring my vision as I fumbled with the keys. Once inside, I let out a scream, a raw, guttural sound that tore through me, releasing weeks of doubt, anger, and heartbreak. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as sobs racked my body, each one pulling me further away from the life I thought I knew. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. I drove aimlessly, the city lights a blur as I left everything behind. Brian, our home, the life we had built together. And as the miles stretched between us, I felt something shift inside me. The pain was still there, sharp and unrelenting, but beneath it was a flicker of something else. Freedom.